Elgin Watch Factory is the next part of our series on the history of Elgin from, I guess from my standpoint, because I want to just show you what is old world and what has been reutilized in a really good way. The Elgin Watch Factory set the time for North America as well as mass-produced watches with interchangeable parts. So therefore, they became the #1 best-selling brand because at the time that the watch factory opened, they also ran a college for younger men wanting to start their career to teach them to then take care of the watches, which meant not necessarily making the parts because the factory made the parts, but how to maintain and then how to quickly fix them so you weren't sending away your watch for weeks or months at a time to Switzerland to have one little part or piece taken care of to get back your precious family heirloom. They made a tremendous volume of watches that were very high quality and produced the men to move to high volume cities where they could open a profitable shop, sell not a myriad of watches, but a high volume of watches, and be able to service the watches and make a great life for themselves. So therefore, the name Elgin became very high quality and also kind of the standard here in the States. Here is the original building, and this is 1969. I'm going to come back to that year because we know a lot happened in our country and in our world in 1969. So let's move on. I'm in the middle of a book called Old Elgin. And again, shout out to Mr. E.C. Elft because the work that he put into this was just phenomenal. And to pass on to me both the knowledge and a book that's signed by him is really kind of exciting. Men and women worked in this factory, but generally the women worked on the floor because they had smaller hands and they could do the tedious things that men could not. Men were sent to the college to learn. This is a really cool picture. And until I knew that part of the history, it made sense why Elgin became such a name brand. And that's what you wanted, was an Elgin watch. Growing up, the factory was already gone and the land was marked, but what used to be the lower railroad tracks was the prairie path. I grew up riding my bike past an open area that had changed over into a retail space, and it was marked, but I never really understood the full magnitude of what it meant to see the plaza demolished for someone a generation or two older than me if they had grown up seeing this and the thousands of people that the watch factory employed. Okay, so this top view, automatically, I just the scope and size of it tells us we're looking at an old world building that was repurposed. You can't open a building this size in the middle of a civil war, and it just doesn't happen. It's made of limestone and brick, both which are quarried or were from the region, sitting along the Fox River here, and then parking was in the front, and we can see that from the picture of the 60s. This is when it was open and they were putting it together. We see the horse and buggies. And then we see cars. So generations of families worked and saw this view, whether they were on a train on either side of the river or on one of the roads. Route 25 sits on the side where the watch factory was. Route 31 is on the opposite bank, and there is still a train line from Chicago and Union Station that runs on the opposite bank. This was taken down in 1969. Let's talk about the year 1969. In 1969, the year we are told humans flew up to the moon and stood on the ball of light, and your government began compelling young men to fight overseas in Vietnam via a draft. The year of Woodstock, the year of the public broadcasting service going live. PBS was a big deal in Chicagoland particularly, and I'm thinking of like Sesame Street, which is a show I grew up on, that to all of the Chicago and Detroit and Cleveland and Philadelphia and even New York kids, we recognized that as a place we wanted to live, among the puppets and the monsters and the clean streets where the brownstones were, to step up into an apartment building, because a lot of us grew up in Cape Cods in small little subdivisions that also had urban homes in the same city. So for thousands or millions of children in, I would say, Generation X, PBS became the broadcasting company of knowledge, and it all happened in 1969. That was the year the clock tower and the watch factory were raised meaning blown to bits and torn down, after 100 years of being in service and being utilized as they were founded. Here's the clock tower. At that point, I do believe New York and Times Square took over as standard timekeeper and kept time with Union Station at Chicago, or in Chicago. I apologize for that. At that turnover between 68 and 70. And then Big Ben, obviously, on the other side of the salty water. And again, these are just amazing. Here's a little car, and here's the watchtower. Much like the tower building in Elgin, it stood tall. Okay, so let's talk about the observatory now. The observatory was on the Cook County side of the river, and it was at the top of a hill on a third railroad track. So there were 3 parallel tracks, and that track was paved over. If you know, pop it in the comments. I want to say mid-80s, when I was wandering around downtown by myself because I could hop on a bus from my subdivision on Poplar Creek, which went into the Fox River, which went into the Mississippi. This is the observatory part, kind of like a planetarium, not nearly as big, but in the basement of this observatory was the equipment that held star time. This is definitely old world technology, and this building is still there. When the clock tower was, when I say the word raised, it confuses me. When the clock tower and the factory were blown to bits and demolitioned before 1970, this was given to the government by way of the government school system. And because I was a school student in Elgin, I got to go every year to go into it and see the night sky and the planetary movements. And we were never allowed in the basement, and I do believe the basement connected via tunnels like all of the old world buildings under the ground, and it was completely closed off to the public. I wrote this because, yes, I was thinking of Sesame Street. Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? Can you tell me how to get to Elgin, Illinois? People would literally just put a timepiece. Illinois. They didn't quite know where it was. They knew it was by Chicago or Old World Shalaga, and that it would get there, and it got there. This, you can't tell, it is solid gold with quartz on the inside. Obviously, it's a beautiful timepiece. I believe there were only a handful sold. This one was made in 1951, so the factory had been going for decades by the time this was created. And I think, well, this is the band. So many people integrated their life in and around the watchtower and the factory and the lifestyle as a whole, because you could work there and make a great living, marry someone who might work there or had worked there and was now home raising children, and make a great life for yourself at the factory in Elgin, Illinois. I just want you to see how giant this structure was. Do believe it sat on something like 66 acres, and the tower was 144 feet high. Cannot even make these numbers up. If you don't know the significance of the double numbers and the duplicity, and we'll go into that, or I'll link a video for you. So I'm gonna call it a day and leave you with that. It's a lot to process. There have been many books written on it, and yet I keep coming back to the Elgin book because the pictures are just amazing to me. Again, if the technology of the day was horse and buggy, how can we even claim we built that? We did not. It was a founded building. But to see that it was repurposed for such a good purpose is really, I guess, what history's all about sometimes. Okay, wow, may you be blessed by the God who gives wisdom. And may He grant you wisdom and peace. Until next time, guys, bye-bye.